Member for Clayfield.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the Palaszczuk government is weak on crime. It doesn't matter if it's bikie crime, robbery and burglary in the suburbs or of our cities and towns, hooliganism or indeed illegal protesters. The Queensland community knows it cannot trust this lefty government and its poor policy decisions. A police minister emasculated by a cabinet and party room that doesn't believe in deterrence and appropriate punishment, doesn't believe the police can be trusted and that only pays lip service to the themes of law and order. A government that removed the toughest bikie laws in the land, laws that they actually voted for when they were in opposition. Laws that empowered police to break the back of bikie gangs, laws that allowed police and the CCC to hunt down the purveyors of misery in the form of methamphetamines and other illicit drugs by holding coercive hearings, and laws that disrupted the culture of outlaw bikie gangs by taking away their symbols and shutting their clubhouses. Steps were taken by the LNP government that not only gave police the laws they needed, but provided them with the resources and the authority to enforce those laws. Coppers in Queensland under the LNP knew they had a government that backed them up. It included increasing the non-parole period for murder of a police officer from 20 to 25 years, and the introduction of one-punch-can-kill laws to ensure cowardly acts causing death and serious harm were properly prosecuted and punished. And the LNP backed up our police and our community with more resources, like a police helicopter
Deputy Speaker, point of order.
For years the Labor government fought against. Mr Speaker, perhaps if I put some context for the minister around the clauses I'm saying is I'm developing, if you like, the argument around the provision of penalties and how penalties are determined and how they take effect. So, as part of the policy consideration under the long title of the bill, which refers to the Police Powers and Responsibilities Act, I think it's important that we set some, if you like, parameters around the debate that I'm going to have, because I will be coming very quickly to the provisions of the legislation. The details in relation to, I suppose, the attitude taken by government in formulating policy and the policy in relation to this legislation, because, quite frankly, Mr Speaker and members, the public in and around Brisbane are sick and tired of the protesters that have been gluing themselves to roads and other things, disrupting them, that is the public, going about their normal lawful business. And the policy behind it's important, and the resources behind the policy is important as well. And looking at the history is also important to put that in context. So what did we do dealing with breaches of the law, with people who broke the law? Well, we backed our police and our community with 1,100 more officers over 4 years. And unlike the Bligh Labor government, of which the current minister was a member, we actually made arrangements for a police helicopter to be brought into the state. A policy we took to the last election, and a policy we still pursue, and the recent events in Townsville, and I refer to hooliganism in our suburbs and cities, shows the need for ever more than ever. And we funded our police with a better digital wireless network. $600 million went into a digital wireless network so that they could have secure communications, so that people, like protesters, couldn't listen to their scanners and hear when the police were turning up, coming to break them up, when the crooks were turning up, coming to, when the police were turning up, coming to break them up, something that had been ignored by the Bligh Labor government for years and years and years and years. And what else did we do? A rapid action group for the Gold Coast. Put that in place and later
Deputy Speaker.
Mr Speaker, this government's policy failure and lack of action has simply, and this is the point, has simply served to embolden all those who want to thumb their noses at the current law regarding assembly and protest here in Queensland. And these protesters thumb their noses at this government because the government has a demonstrated record of incompetence when it comes to law and order in this state, and Queenslanders know it. They know intrinsically, almost without having to be told, that a Labor lefty government with an emasculated police minister is not going to protect them and is not going to take the steps that are necessary to ensure that they can go about their daily business without interference from a bunch of stupid idiots who seek only to gain publicity for themselves. And I'm not talking about the government, I'm talking about the protesters who are out there today. Queenslanders, Mr Speaker, simply want to know that their kids are safe, that action is being taken to stop drugs being peddled, that they can go shopping without getting caught up in a bikie war, that their cars won't get pinched, their homes broken into, and that they can get to and from work without needless and unlawful protest. And in the regions and on farms and in abattoirs, they want to know that protesters won't breach hard-won privacy and property rights, which are the very foundations of our modern democratic society, the society, in fact, that gives people the ability to lawfully protest. This bill, when it passes, will take some small step in addressing the previous failures of the Palaszczuk government's policy and action. But why, Mr Speaker, has it taken so long? We can legitimately ask what has spurred this government into action when the writing has been on the wall for months. I first called out the stupidity of the protesters this amendment is directed to in June, following the first act of stupidity on the 17th of June. I called on the government to recover the costs of emergency services personnel deployed to deal with this offender and his compatriot at the time, and I wrote a letter to the Minister on the 20th of June and to the Police Commissioner on the same day, outlining the disruption that was being caused to people in my electorate, the people who couldn't get to work, and the concerns that people had in relation to what happens if there had been a real emergency, not a pretend climate emergency, but a real emergency that required ambulance, police and fire brigade to turn up somewhere and save lives and protect property. I wrote that on the 20th of June. I received a response from the new Police Commissioner on the 15th of July, and I received a very, very short response from the Minister on the 25th of July, and for the sake of completeness I table all three of those documents in the House. And Mr Speaker, no action was taken. A week later, in June, and emboldened, as I said, the protesters struck again with no action taken. In early July, another series of protests occurred, and again no action. And then on the 15th of July, the Premier stood up and issued her sternest warning yet. She said, please take no further action. Please stop illegally protesting. Well, wasn't that effective? We had a week of protests. We had the week of protests here in Brisbane and finally some action. And is that action effective? Well, I would say not. In fact, just yesterday, protesters outside this place were publicly declaring how they could still cause huge disruption and get around the proposed legislation. Mr Deputy Speaker, the time has come to say, and I say it here today, this law will not work. It is too little and it is too late. The protesters will get around this law. They will thumb their noses at this government, as they have done for the past 4 months. And this government again refuses to put the interests of the broader public ahead of those of a noisy minority. Now, the idea of legitimate protest is something we should, and I believe we do all support, and the legislation in Queensland, including the Peaceful Assembly Act, reflects the expectations of Queenslanders. That is, causing disruption, which does occur, by marching or assembling after notifying of the march is acceptable, and indeed it is accepted. While disruptive, and it is disruptive, it's not unnecessarily so. What's now happening is that the protest is the disruption itself. It is not the assembly or the protest that is the aim of these ratbags. It is the disruption as an end in itself. In effect, Mr Deputy Speaker, the means has become the end. Previously, the end was a gathering, a public meeting, a show of dissent or difference, and I'm all for that. I'm happy to stand out the front there, and I've done it many times with my friends from the ETU and the CFMEU, occasionally asking me to take some far more athletic steps than I would do off the front of the Port Cochure, and they are perfectly entitled to it, and I welcome that. But here, Mr Speaker, this is not what we are talking about. This is disruption as an end in itself, not a means to an end of genuine dissent, disagreement or expressing a different point of view. I believe that in addition to what we see here today and the amendments moved by my friend the member for Toowoomba North, that we need stronger, faster and bigger financial penalties to be considered. The costs of the people of Queensland, starting with the costs of emergency personnel and proceeding to the loss of business and the economy are large, and the loss to protesters should be commensurate. Mr Speaker, as has been said, we will support this legislation, and I urge members to support the amendments moved by the member for Toowoomba North so that this legislation can be effective, and I call on the Palaszczuk government to finally grow a spine, take serious action and take on the Crims in Queensland.